you too, wouldn't it? So we're going to start with the completing the square worksheet. Would help if I had a pen turned on. Ink, I need ink. So when we're completing the square, we've got steps that we have to follow, right? Completing the square. So I'm going to take your first homework problem that requires you to complete the square. The number 2, you're just taking the square root of each side because it's already in that trinomial form, right? But if we look at number 4 on your homework, right, on your worksheet, we have x squared equals 16x minus 63. And what we're going to do is I will write the steps, and after I write the step, we'll do that step. And that way we can kind of see it in order. Sound like a good idea? I think it does. So the first thing we want to do when we're completing the square is we want anything with x's on the left, right? And then our constants, just our numbers, right? Numbers. Just plain numbers, right? On the right. So if we look at this problem that we have right here, we do have our just plain number on the right already, but we do have an x on that side as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move the x value to the other side by subtracting it out. It's a positive, so I know I can just subtract 16x from both sides. And on this side, I would have x squared minus 16x equals negative 63, right? Because we took the 16x off of there. Our next step doesn't really apply to this problem, but I'm going to write it anyways, right? If our x coefficient, our a value, right? Remember, we're talking about ax squared plus bx plus c, right? And that a is whatever's in front of our x squared. If a is not equal to 1, we need to divide everything by a. Now, in this case, it's equal to 1 because we don't have a number there, which means that it is 1, right? We have 1x squared. So we don't have to do this step. It's already done. So we're going to move on to the next step, which would be take half of b and square it. Then add to both sides of the equal sign. And add to both sides of equation, right? That means I have to add it to both sides of the equal sign once I find that value. What does that mean? Our b value in this is negative 16. B is always what's in front of just the x. So in this case, what we're doing is we're taking b, we're dividing it in half, and then we're going to square it. So if we do that, our b in this case is negative 16. So I'm going to take negative 16 and divide it in half and then square it. So negative 16 divided by 2 is just negative 8, right? When I square that, it becomes positive 64. Did you follow that? I want to make sure you followed that before I move on. I want to make sure you saw how that step worked because it's a really important step. Okay, so now we're going to take that 64 that we got right here, and we're going to add it into both sides of the equation, right? And the reason that we did it is it creates what we call this perfect square trinomial. And so I can take this, and I can take the square root of this and the square root of this, and then square them. So I can go, okay, x squared, the square root of x squared is just x, minus this is what determines whether it's plus or minus, is what's in front of our b. So in this case, it's a negative, so we want this to be negative. And then we're going to take the square root of 64, which we know is 8, and then square the whole thing, right? Here I have minus 63 plus 64, right? Which is just 1. So what did we do there? We should write that down, right? We wrote the factors, right? The factor of the perfect square trinomial. Right? We created that perfect square trinomial. When we completed the square, that's the reason we did it, was so that we could write it in that form. Right? The reason that we do it is now we have this perfect square, right? And so to solve it, all we have to do is take the square root of both sides and then solve, right? So if I take the square root of this, I just wind up with what's right here, right? Because it's like saying x minus 8 times x minus 8. And when I have something like that under square root, I can just write it as x minus 8. But I'm not just taking the square root of the one side, I'm taking it of both. So it equals plus or minus. Well, 1 times 1 is what equals 1, so it's plus or minus 1. Did you follow that part? I'm going to ask you this at every step because I want to know if you're not getting it somewhere. I want to know where the somewhere is that you're not getting it. You know what I mean? So that we can clear it up. Well, it gets divided by 2 and then squared. So we add it to here and to here, so it stays equal. Okay, well, that's what we were creating, right? We're creating this perfect square because x minus 8. Okay, so I created this perfect square, right? In here, this perfect square trinomial. It's what happens when we do that step with the b half of b squared. When we add that, it creates this thing where I know that I can break this down as the square root of this plus or minus the square root of this. Whether it's plus or minus is all on the b, right? If b is negative, this is negative. If b is positive, this is positive. So I can just take the square root of this and the square root of this, and I create that in the parentheses, right? Because what it's saying is that this is the factors. I'm saying that x minus 8 times x minus 8 is going to give us this. And you can see that it's true. If I go x times x, I get x squared minus 8x minus 8x plus 64. And if we combined these minus 8x's, we'd have x squared minus 16x plus 64. So this right here is equal to this, right? It's just in its factored form, which is why we created that in the first place, was so we could put it in that factored form. And the reason we did that is then we could just take the square root of it to solve, right? I don't know if you remember a few worksheets back, we did a thing where we were just taking the square roots of things to solve them. So once we, do you need this piece anymore? I'll erase it if you don't, just so we have the room to work. Well, I'll send it'll be on video too. Actually, I wonder if I can. It's like this lasso thing that I thought would help me move it. But it doesn't really matter. We can leave it there. So here's what I did. Once we write it like this, we took the square root. Well, the square root of that gives us what's inside it, right? In the same respect that if I took, if I've got the square root of 4, right? That's the same as the square root of 2 times 2, right? And since there's 2 of them, I could just write it as plus or minus 2. In this case, I have 2 of these, right? Once it's squared, I have 2 of them. It's like saying x minus 8 times x minus 8, which means that I can pull the x minus 8 out. Does that make sense? Okay. I just want to make sure you saw how we got from the x minus 8 squared when we took the square root to get x minus 8. Now, the square root of 1, well, 1 is just 1 times 1. So we could write that as plus or minus 1. And now all we have to do is go, well, I've got x minus 8 equals 1, but I also have x minus 8 equals negative 1. And then we just have to solve for x now, right? We just add 8 to both sides, right? And we would get x equals 9. And here, when we add 8 to both sides, we get x equals 7. And so that's how we're going to find our both of our solutions with that. And that is how we deal with the completing the square, right? All the steps are shown there. So I'm going to move into the quadratic formula, and we'll do one of the quadratic formula problems, okay? Shoot. Well, we had it equals 1, right? We just added, right? This was what we were left with. That's a good question. Right? This is what we had in that last step, right? Let me rewrite it in a little bit so you could see it clearly. We had the square root equals 1, right? This is what we got from this. We created this x minus 8 squared from this, right? It's just the factors of it. And then we have minus 63 plus 64, which is just 1. To solve it, we have to take the square root of both sides. I can't just take the square root of this side. I also have to take the square root of this side, right? Because otherwise I'm messing with the equality. Remember, when we do anything to one side of an equal sign, we have to do it to the other as well. Like if we add or subtract or anything like that to one side of an equal, we have to do it to the other. So if I take the square root of one side, I have to take the square root of the other. So that's where that square root comes from. The thing is the square root of 1 is just plus or minus 1, right? And that's what allows us to solve this now. Was that helpful? Okay. We're going to do the same thing with a quadratic so that you can see it step by step by step, okay? So I'm going to do one of your quadratic formula problems as well. So let's look at quadratic formula. All right. So again, we're using the form ax squared plus bx plus c. In this case, we want it to equal 0. But I'm just writing that so that you remember where the a, b, and c come from, right? A is always what's in front of x squared. B is always what's in front of x. And c is the constant that has no variable, right? But let's write what the quadratic formula itself is. Quadratic formula is a way of solving for our x values. So we write it as x equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a, right? So what we need to do is know what our a, b, and c are. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did before. I'm going to write the steps on one side and solve on the other. And so we'll do it with whatever this first problem is, which is minus 2x squared plus 7x equals 3. Now our first step in this one is we want it set equal to 0, right? Set equal to 0, which means that we want everything on the left-hand side, right? Everything that's not 0, everything goes on the left. So if we look at this particular problem, we don't have that happening right now, right? We have that 3 that's on the right-hand side. So we're just going to subtract 3 from both sides, and then we can rewrite this as minus 2x squared plus 7x minus 3 equals 0. The next thing we want to do is identify our A, B, and C, right? So if we look at this, we know that A equals whatever's in front of x squared, so that's just negative 2. B equals whatever is in front of x, so that's 7. And C equals whatever doesn't have a variable, right? And so that is going to be negative 3. If any of these don't exist, well, not this one. If this one doesn't exist, then we're not working with a quadratic anymore. But if either of these two, if we don't have an x value, right, or we don't have a constant, those just become 0. B would be 0, or C would be 0. So we've identified our A, B, and C. Now we need to plug those in. Plug A, B, C into quadratic formula. So let's look at that. Our quadratic formula is x equals minus b, right? So minus b would be minus 7 plus or minus the square root of b squared. Well, that would be 7 squared minus 4 times a. Well, a is just negative 2 times c, or c is just negative 3, all over 2 times our a, which is just negative 2, right? So all we did was we replaced a, b, and c in the formula with the numbers that we have determined that a, b, and c are based on the equation, right? And so now we just solve, right? Simplify, solve, right? And we just take baby steps on it. Try not to look at it as a whole, because sometimes you get overwhelmed when you see that much math. So we just do the baby steps, right? We start a little at a time. We've got this minus 7. Can't do anything with it right now, so we're just going to write it as minus 7 plus or minus, and we're going to deal with what's under the square root first. 7 squared is 7 times 7, which is just 49. And then I've got minus times a minus is a minus. I mean, is a plus, but times a negative, another negative is a minus. So I know my answer is going to be minus, right? So I've got 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 3 is 24. So it's going to be minus 24. All over 2 times negative 2, well, that's just negative 4. So now we're going to simplify this a little more, right? We're still going to leave this minus 7 plus or minus alone for right now. We're going to deal with what's under our square root. 49 minus 24 is 25 over negative 4. Right? And we're just simplifying this, right? We're just, oh, what did I do? Oh. Sometimes if I have my pen too close to the tablet and I try and use the mouse, they start fighting with each other. Yeah. They don't know which one they're supposed to listen to. So the square root of 25, what's the square root of 25? Yeah. So what we're going to get out of this is minus 7 plus or minus 5 over 4. And this contains both of our solutions, right? One of them is that x equals minus 7 plus 5 over 4. And we'll simplify that in a minute. And the other one is x equals minus 7 minus 5 over 4, right? They're going to be two different solutions. So if we look at this, we've got negative 7 plus 5. Well, that's minus 2 over 4, right? Which is just minus 1/2. This one, we've got minus 7 minus 5. Well, that's minus 12 over 4, which is just negative 3. So our two x values are negative 3 and negative 1/2. All right. So keep that in mind. The steps are going to be the same no matter what numbers we have in here, right? Every step should follow this pattern, right? Same thing with completing the square. Any way you look at it, they're going to follow the same pattern, right? When you do your homeworks or your review or your quiz, take these steps and have them in front of you. There's nothing that stops you from doing that, right? Have them in front of you, follow the steps a little at a time. You've got these videos and these notes at your disposal, so you can always watch through them again. When you do the quiz this time, it's not going to be in class. You're going to have a couple days to get through it. I'll give you the review. I'll probably post the review on Sunday, but I'll see you on Tuesday and we can go over it. And then Thursday, when I see you with the quiz, you'll have the whole weekend to work on that. So take your time with it. All right. Bring up your steps. Do it a little bit at a time. All right. When I see you on Tuesday, I want you to work on these two worksheets this weekend. Try and get comfortable with the material. When I see you on Tuesday, we'll try and do a graphing one, okay? Yeah, because we have that one handwritten one that needed to be graphed as well. Yeah, so we'll do one of those, but I want you to get more comfortable with this first before we do that. I'm going to stop the recording right now. I don't want to stop that. I want to stop the